My name is Stan Garrun. My title is Head of Africa Analytics in the Urban Real Estate Research Unit, which is a unit that's attached to the University of Cape Town, and it's in association with Nedbank. So Nedbank are our main sponsor, stroke supporter. And our brief is, within this unit, is to actually look at measuring property and developing indicators and returns and measures across different African countries. In a way, it's a bit of a pioneering thing because we're looking to unravel some of the lack of transparency that exists in many of those areas. My experience and my focus has been on the non-residential side, not purely non-residential, but essentially the investment side of data, And because housing is so often held by private people, therefore the data comes from official sources, from deeds registers and that. The investment data that comes from institutions, because a lot of the, just about all the investment that is owned by institutions is primarily offices, shopping centres, factories and so on, although they do also own residential. So to the extent that residential is owned by these guys, we look at that. So my background basically is I was head of a company called IPD. I developed it in South Africa over the last 16 odd years. We built a database in South Africa and in Botswana, two countries in Africa, but didn't really progress much further because the database we were looking at was more of an investor database, and in that sense it included a lot of very granular property data, but also a lot of financial data, valuations, assumptions in that data, rentals, etc., costs and so on. So therefore the data was incredibly rich and incredibly detailed. And we, at the company I ran, called IPD, we did it across the world, in all developed countries. South Africa was the only developing country that we actually worked in. So we were concentrating on a number of different things. We therefore never really got into Africa to the extent that I would have wanted to. Then I had an opportunity at the end of last year to join the University of Cape Town as part of this project, and to see if we can actually generate a database in Africa. We think it's time. We know that Africa is many different destinations, many different cultures, many different environments. It's not one, but in any event, we believe that in key jurisdictions or countries at this stage, there is certainly appetite, there's certainly ability, and I think that what's happening is that we just haven't had independent, objective observers that are prepared to go and try and act as referees within that market and put together a database. So we've seen that as a challenge to begin with. We will, of course, use that. The data we'll collect will be used in a number of ways. Firstly, investors decide whether markets are good and bad. The second thing is that markets are able to talk to each other or talk the same language. So it's creating a common language in the continent. Thirdly, it's benchmarking because it enables owners of property to be able to benchmark themselves against their peers. And then I guess finally, as a source of research, a source of analysis, and a source of really understanding what's happening as far as property goes. So, yeah, we're very excited about it. It's a move from, in my case, from a very private sector oriented thing to more of an academic focus, but the ability to in fact start providing some transparency and opening up the knowledge, especially that people would have in different countries, is a very, very exciting one. What we would do at the university is actually collect, obviously, a less detailed level of collection that we would have previously, or that IPD currently still does. It is investment property, so it can, in that sense, be anything that is investable. So if you've got housing schemes that are invested in, they would certainly be part of it. So it'd be residential, but by and large, it is commercial because you have a lot of institutions that naturally are investors. They own the property and they then make money out of renting it out, and they look at and they make money out of the capital appreciation of those properties and run those either as listed property funds or as normal owners of property. What we do is we try to collect as detailed as we possibly can, deliberately ignoring certain financial things. We're working at the moment with a big property manager who works across Africa and one or two very large property owners. So what they would do would give us their data down to a building level. We then collect it at that level. So we collect all their revenue accounts, their full income statement, in fact, descriptive records, where the property is, what it's called, and so on. The spatial data, how big it is, how much is occupied, how much is vacant, and then also the costs, the operating costs of running those buildings, as well as the valuation, etc. So it's we try and build it up from as micro a level as possible and try and build it up so that we know what we're comparing in different countries and different areas between different providers is collected or is calculated rather in the same way. Because it's better to collect the rand value and the square meterage and then work out a ratio rather than collect the ratio, because you don't really know how that ratio is collected. That's one principle. The other one is confidentiality. We collect this data very confidentially. And thirdly, we validate it as much as we possibly can through questionnaires and sign-offs by senior people in the company, usually financial directors. We also ask for valuation certificates by valuers. So we try to verify that data as much as we possibly can, so it's not subjective. Although ultimately it is a survey, even though it's not really a sample survey, but it's a survey methodology, but it is as numerous as it can possibly be. There is an incredible amount of anecdotal information that comes out of Africa. Not only anecdotal, but research, piles of research. But when you start talking about numbers, okay, great big research study on whatever country, but when you come forward and say, okay, now let's understand what are the rentals in that market, what are the costs, what are you paying for things, what are the returns, the financial returns, everyone goes blank. That data just doesn't exist. So, what I'd like to see there is that the countries show the transparency in producing the data and the data becomes available. And I think that what happens so often is that a fund manager sits in Germany, say, he hears or he reads that Africa is doing pretty well, and he says, great, I've got an allocation to emerging markets, let me invest there. Send me the numbers. And people say there are no numbers. And I think there are no rental, the rentals aren't there, the yields aren't obvious, the prices aren't obvious. And I think that is sort of limits Africa. And then the fund manager says, okay, well, then I'll just have to invest this into China, which I at least understand to some extent. And I think that's my goal to try, or our goal to try and make Africa transparent.